Hello, this is the Circularity Catalyst podcast, where regenerative thinking meets real-world strategy. I'm your host, Ken Alston. Welcome back to the Circularity Edge podcast. We're back today with a terrific guest, someone I've known for many years, and I've come to admire his design and innovation-led approach to sustainable business. Our guest today is Aly Khalifa. He's the Innovation Director of Positive Company. Aly, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much. Good to be with you, Ken.
So, Aly, we spoke briefly before we started the recording. Many people ask me about how do I get into this sustainability and circular economy area of work. Would you maybe start by giving our listeners and viewers a few minutes breakdown of what you do and how you got in?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think to be a creative person, it's just going to come out a little bit naturally. So I went to NC State University for design. And because I'm from an Egyptian family, we had our choices to be anything we wanted as long as a doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Right.
So I ended up double majoring design with engineering, and NC State was a place that offered both. But I tell you what, it's one of these things about being a creative person is that once you become sensitive to the environment, and once you're sensitive to things, then all of a sudden the world looks a little bit more imperfect, and you have to sort of deal with new information. And so one of the things that kind of hit me was all of a sudden being, confronted as a college student that Styrofoam is going to last hundreds of years. And we were celebrating a centennial celebration at NC State. And I was like, yeah, but you know what? This Styrofoam cup is going to live 5 times longer than this university's made it so far. So let's make a sculpture about that. Let's make a sculpture that's going to outlive the university. So I as a student project, and I was like, I'm going to make the 5,000 year monstrosity with, based on all the Styrofoam we're getting from dining hall.
Right.
And so I told all my friends, hey, when you get your hot dog or whatever else, bring me the Styrofoam bin. Let's see how much we're going to collect. And I'm going to make a big, fabulous sculpture.
And how did your dorm room look?
I didn't do it in my dorm room. I actually did it at the College of Design classroom. So,
So they had to house it for you.
yes, they had it. So I had a big bin. Everything was being collected, and it's going on for about 2 weeks. It grew pretty fast. You start realizing how much Styrofoam we're consuming just, to hold food for 7 minutes, or something like that. Well, at one point, the dean's secretary came downstairs and said, dining services is on the line. They said they want to talk to you. And, so I went up, I took the call. They said, Mr. Khalifa, we understand that you want to talk to us about our dining service. I said, yes, I do. And sure enough, had an appointment with the dining hall and talked to him about my concerns. And within 2 weeks, they canceled all procurement of Styrofoam. And it was really the first time.
You made a difference, that's for sure.
Yeah, first of all, it's just like, wow, the power of intention, the power of just putting it out there. And all I was going to really do, I wasn't, doing a protest. I was just going to do kind of a sculpture and have fun. And what's amazing is I never even had to do the sculpture.
Huh. Yeah, so you got a better end result without actually doing the work. That's a pretty amazing outcome.
So, as a student, that gave me a lot of encouragement, that you can become sensitive to an issue. You can then kind of, ideate, come up with a concept, and then promote that issue and get it out there. And it can have like a really powerful effect just with that intention, just by being sensitive and agreeing to take action on it.
Well, I think that's such an important point because I hear people, particularly young people, saying sort of, I get it, I get the intention behind what you're trying to do, but what can I do? In personalizing it to themselves, they find it difficult to do what you clearly did and just do something, right? Even as a student, you were able to do something. But talk a little bit more about how we can encourage people take what seem small steps, but actually all add up to big steps.
Yeah, I mean, people ask me that all the time, and it's just like wherever you are, your office, your home, your school. I've had high school students ask me, how do they get involved? And I was like, well, what are they doing in your school that you can react to directly? Like we hear about these big issues, on a huge scale. But for instance, like after this, styrofoam project, I realized like I couldn't stop there. And so then put in the first recycling systems at all the different colleges at NC State. And it was just like, hey, can I do this? Can you find me a spot to do it? And I think universities and schools in particularly, you know, are more amenable to students doing something if there's a learning outcome attached to it. So, I had to learn a few things in order to get those kinds of systems in. And I learned a lot in that process. I made relationships with, people who are doing with waste management and things like that. So I grew as a person, but also, it was a concrete action I could take. And it was something that I could do by myself, or, I could initiate by myself and then learn to collaborate with others to implement. And so it just felt like the more I could do that, the better. So then I went on to designing bicycle facilities for the university and getting the first bicycle program kind of updated in a few decades. And
So
again, just sort of,
it sounds to me as though the barriers to doing something are actually probably lower than most people might think, right? That when
yeah,
you actually try something, what
yeah.
you think in your own head might be barriers probably dissolve away.
I think that's so true. Sometimes it takes a little bit of fearlessness, and it is going to be a distraction from your other schoolwork or some other things like that. So don't take on too much. And I think there's always that balance, it's like, what are you willing to address and what do you have time for and not? But if you just choose one thing and just focus on it for a few months, get a few friends around you to sort of hold you accountable and cheerlead you, um, I think we can do a lot just within our local thing. So I think it's that think global but act local kind of idea. Seems to work.
Now, you've worked on some much bigger initiatives than that. I mean, one in particular that we talked about before was your involvement in the plastics in the ocean. This is one, I think, of the top 10 unsustainable things that's in the news from time to time, along with things like microplastics. Tell us about the work you did in plastics in the ocean, because that too had a very practical let's do something part of it.
Yeah, I think the whole issue, just to sort of frame ocean plastic, because a lot of people are like, why is it in there? Like how did this become a problem? And it's a human made problem. And the funny part, it's a human made problem created by a human made solution. Um, I think one of the telling things for me was my brother was in the Peace Corps in Honduras. And so I went and visited. I stayed about 4 or 5 weeks, just, kind of learning how that was working, what it meant. And I mean, sure enough, like water quality was so bad in Honduras. And most people I met had a sibling who tragically perished because of waterborne disease. And so, well, what's a great solution to that is water bottles, right? Like, in a way, like water bottles enabled clean water to get to the most remote parts of Honduras and is an incredible solution, really, and very light. And there's a lot of really great things about a water bottle. The thing is like the maybe the right boundary conditions weren't given to the water bottle designers, right? Which is like, okay, we do want to get the most efficient way to get clean water to save people's lives. That's extremely important. But there's more to it than just when they get the water. It's also kind of what happens after. Right. And so now, if tragically, if you go, scuba diving or snorkeling off the coast of Honduras, it's just filled with ocean plastic because we designed getting water there to people, but we didn't design what to do with the package after. And so these, communities all of a sudden had plastic where there was no plastic. They had no way of sort of dealing with plastic. And so,
This is an iconic. I mean, as you tell the story, this for other contexts, this is an iconic underlying issue that it pretty much applies to everything, right? So it's this
so
lack
true.
of wider design thinking over the whole use cycle of the whatever it is we're talking about. In this case, a bottle just hasn't
Yeah.
been built in.
No, and I just think the designers weren't given that, or the engineers weren't given that as a criteria. So it's one of those things, like the boundary conditions of our problem, like, and as okay, so I always bounce back between my designer training and my engineer training. But in engineering training, it's like, what are the boundary conditions? Do we have to worry about seismic activity or not, or wind loads or not? And so do we have to worry about, what to do with end of use of these materials or not? And so if you're not given that boundary condition, it's no fault really to the engineer in a way, because they solved the problem as given. But now we're getting better at understanding, I hope, that sometimes it's on our professional responsibility to take that next step to say, okay, here's your problem as stated, problem as given. But as a professional in this space working with polymers, they should be treated as a controlled substance. And so, how do I design around that? Certainly with plutonium, we would design differently. We would know that. So, as we need to be thinking about all the materials, like how do we steward them? And so, yeah, so ocean plastic comes from people just not thinking about what happens next.
Well, how did that translate into the project that you did?
So, well, a couple different ways, or there's several different ways I've been involved in this topic. Um, and there's just so many different parts of the problem to look at. I mean, for one is, where does it come from? So in Honduras, or like, for instance, you can, closer to shore, even as Haiti, right? Where, you, you know, if there's no waste disposal, then, well, that plastic goes onto the ground. And then in one rainfall, it's in a river, a couple more rainfalls, it's like, probably near shore, might get washed back onto the beach, or, a few more rainfalls, it might go, deep ocean. Um, and so it's kind of like the Inuit have all these different words for snow. Once we're in the industry of ocean plastic, there's a lot of different words for ocean plastic. Um, so it can be ocean bound, which means it's like it hasn't yet hit the river. It's just blowing
On
around
its
the
way.
streets.
Yeah.
It's on its way. Or it can be, waterway, or it can be near shore, or it can be beach, or it can be high seas. So we use all these different terms to sort of determine what kind of projects, work with that stuff. And that's important. I think it's like
So the context, right, to each of the subsets. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's, that's the, first step is, how do you talk about it? And, you and I both worked with William McDonough, and learned so much about the way you talk about things determines so much the way you think about things.
Yeah. And Bill was one of the first to talk about the Pacific Gyre and the great garbage patch, as it's become known
Yeah.
colloquially. Yeah.
Yeah, what most people don't know is only 6% of the plastic that goes into the ocean floats. So when you talk about a gyre that's about the size of Texas, imagine that's only 6%. 94% is under on the seafloor. So it's a monumental amount of plastic in the ocean right now.
So what did you do to make a contribution to these different parts of the issue?
Yeah, so I co-founded at one company called Oceanworks, which became really kind of a trading platform. There's people who are doing ocean plastic collection and, trying to deal with this fugitive material. It could be in any of those different states, like I was mentioning, like in a river, or it could be on land, or it could be whatever. So we would sort of categorize which of those types of ocean plastic it would be. And then you have a market. You have people who want to use these kinds of materials, but there's like a disconnect usually in there. And so Oceanworks created a marketplace, essentially, to sort of
So
connect those
connecting
who
the
are
collectors with the buyers of the material.
exactly. The biggest problem there was is risk. So in many cases, we had, a CEO say, that's great. We're going to incorporate ocean plastic. We would have a trial run. Everything works great. Then nothing happens. And it's like, well, why does nothing happen? I was like, well, in order to go to high production, we got to put it in the really nice machine. And that really nice machine is worth millions and millions of dollars. And there's a foreman in charge of that machine whose compensation and, rewards and everything is tied to the production on that line. And the last
No
thing he wants to
downtime,
do,
no downtime.
is put dirty material into the shiny machine, right? And so the trick was, well, how do you de-risk this material? So, and a lot of times it was sitting down with the foreman, honestly, again, just to say, hey, it's going to be all right. And tell me what you need. I've done this test. I've cleaned it this way. I've gotten this. Yeah, it was dirty, but we've cleaned it and I've cleaned it to these standards. Do those standards work for you? And it would have to like kind of get to that level where people would have to say, okay, I'm going to risk my livelihood to take this sustainability leap with my really nice equipment. And, and a lot of times they didn't have much upside. They only saw downside. And
Yeah,
that
I
was a
saw
lot.
that. I saw that time after time again when I was working in global multinational,
Yeah.
where I was coming in with solutions that were great, and they actually worked, and I'd done the homework to make sure they would work, but there was that skepticism, right, that you had to overcome. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember having one plastic blow molder who told me the design I wanted molded was impossible to mold.
Uh-huh.
Thankfully, it was back in the days of VHS tapes, right? So that shows you how long ago it is. But I had a VHS tape in my bag, and I popped it in his little machine, and you saw the self same plastic molding machine that he was going to use actually making them. And it pretty much took away his argumentation, obviously. But it
Right.
shows the level of detail, yeah, that you have to go to give people the confidence, right? It's a confidence building exercise.
It's, most sustainability is a human problem. It's very rarely a technical problem. You just have to sit down, you have to take some time, have coffee with the people, whatever, just to sort of like let them, they have to voice their concerns. You have to make sure you're meeting their concerns. And a lot of times it's things that you didn't necessarily see coming. Um, so yeah, so Ocean Works, that's really where I spent most of my time was like just what we call de-risking these materials. How do you make these materials so that they really are accepted with these manufacturers? And once you sort of crack that, it starts moving. And once you see one customer doing it and getting, some confidence going, you see others start to, pay attention.
Yeah, they
And
can
so,
see that it's real.
yeah. But, then you bring on a new supplier. Well, you have to, now say we have new testing and the only way people are going to buy your stuff is if we really clean it up, appropriately and make sure it's not going to contaminate or anything like that. And there's been so much work now done, especially in the commodity materials like Ed Koziar and Tamsin Edifal. Like those are two champions of like getting, recycled materials all the way up to super high use, even for food contact. And so if, once you have those kinds of technologies, we can get it to the highest level again. There's no excuse, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, as soon as you can say you've got food contact, covered, you're right. There's not much left to say after that.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I think, so that was the kind of the first real foray into it was then just building up supply chains with Ocean Works. So from, Sri Lanka through Indonesia and throughout Asia, just finding like, where these materials are and then working with brands and, a lot of them, the brands might be in the US and Europe, but a lot of times their manufacturers were, let's say in China or Vietnam. Well, there's, all the import stuff. Like how do you import recycled material into China can become real tricky. So you have to get it to a certain state where it's treated like new material. So you have to get it that clean and that polished and that beautiful. But if you do, there you go. And so a lot of it was just sort of some technical, like navigating some of those things, making sure we're ticking boxes so everyone's there. But at the end of the day, it's like finding a bottle, cleaning it, shredding it, categorizing it, by color and by quality and reselling it. It it's it's a lot easier to do that stuff than to like mine under earth. And so that's one of the things while I was living in Australia working with them. I was like, okay, they're losing their entire mining industry, but wow, they're not really recycling enough. They can repurpose those jobs and machines and all that stuff to above ground mining, otherwise known as recycling.
Where would you say the ocean plastics and ocean stuff in general is right now? Is some of it fixed, a small amount, a large amount? Where do you see the movement and the momentum? Is it continuing to build on what you did?
I uh I think it's on both sides there's an acceleration. So I think there's more people paying attention, there's more cleanups, there's more efforts. I see positive forces there. At the same time, we're using more water bottles than ever. We're producing more plastic than ever. So, you kind of have two acceleration curves that I think are offsetting to a still real net of bad news.
Yeah. So
There are some
progress, but
mechanisms.
insufficient to the task, basically.
Yes, because we haven't, you got to turn off the tap. It's like bailing, it's like, okay, we can keep bailing out the boat, but until you fix the leak, um, we're just working harder and harder. And so we really need some design change happening. One of which is, okay, yeah, incorporating recycled content into those products that are appropriate, you know, and all that. And then, but at the same time, when we're specifying things like how much plastic do we need to be using, and there's a lot of arguments back and forth about, plastic versus paper and all that stuff, and it can get really complex. But if you think about plastic as a controlled substance, a material that we really do have to control so it doesn't go into our brains and in our bloodstream and everywhere else that we're finding right now. If it's a controlled substance, then you have to treat it and design that way and realize it's not always just about weight, lightweighting, and things like that, which has been sort of the mantra of the industry.
What would you say? I'm going to get a little bit more personal here. What would say s- is your sustainability superpower? I noticed on your website you talked about your secret sauce being inventive culture. So innovation and doing it right the first time is clearly important to you. But how would you characterize what sets you apart as a business sustainability professional?
Well, um, we all have our unique upbringings. So yeah, I think, for one, I just credit, my parents and my family just kind of having this ethos about trying to help and trying to be part of the solution, standing up to injustice, standing up to things that aren't right and trying to do what you can, however you perceive them and having a little bit of courage. And sometimes you need a really good network of friends to help give you that courage, honestly.
Right.
So I really credit my parents with that part of the ethos. I think another part of it might be, um, like really doing some technical rigor on things. And if there's a problem, maybe we have to look into it a little bit deeper and understanding about why it's there. And so what I've found in our team, running a consultancy, working with other companies, that there is like an environment that helps you create these solutions. And so that's what we ultimately came to call inventive culture, which is, and you know it when you're in it. You know when you walk into a place and it's just kind of buzzing and you just see a lot of it, creativity and productivity and all that stuff. And like there's like this inventive culture you can feel. Um, and those places are special, right?
Yeah,
So
they
the
are. Yeah, I remember I was very fortunate to have 8 years as director of sustainable product innovation at a major multinational company, and I had a roving brief internally. I could go pretty much everywhere I wanted and talk about this stuff and insert myself into their processes, somewhat whether they wanted me to or not. In the nicest possible way. So I was able to get into new product innovation meetings where marketing teams were saying, okay, what's our new product launch for, 18 months, 2 years from now going to be? And they'd have ideation sessions. And some of those would be exactly like you were describing. The room you're in had lots of fun and play and, the encouragement to be creative, to get out of the box, to think differently, to combine ideas in ways do things that nobody's ever thought about before in within the sphere of whatever that brand was. And that was a great opportunity for me to bring in something that wasn't in the mix at all at the time, which is exactly
Mm,
what you've been talking about, which is you've got to put the design conditions into the mix to bring the sustainability in. And so that's what I did. And it's very fun to be in those sessions. And it's even more so when you see some of your ideas get included in what comes out the other end of that sausage machine of the product
that's true.
development process, right?
Yeah.
And you can
No,
see your
listen, I think,
innovation on the shelf somewhere.
yeah, and empowering all those people on your team is like an important part of that. One of the things, I tried to stay sensitive to is like, someone would come to work and say, man, I keep tripping over this little piece of rebar on the sidewalk on my way to work. And, it's like, all right, hold on a minute. What are we going to do about it? It's like, let's take that on. It's been bugging you for 3 months. How are we going to deal with this stuff? Should we go do like an art project there? Should we call the city? Should we just get a grinder out? Like, what are we going to do? Let's all solve this for this person. And it'd be amazing because if you engage someone on your team at that level and say, hey, there's this thing that is not part of the job and not part of anything else, but it's just something that you have been sensitive to, you know, because your only choice is either you turn yourself off to that information or you engage it, right? And if you turn yourself off to every problem that you see, you'll eventually become dead inside, right? Like you'll lose that creative spark. And so I just found it was useful to listen to people. What is it that they're sensitive to? You can tell there's something bugging someone, or, they'll complain about something a few times, and let's deal with it.
Yeah, so
The
what
whole
can we
team is
do? Yeah, yeah.
going to invest in you right now. And then that would just give so much confidence to people to start voicing things that are more and more important to them, whether it was related to a project or not. And so I felt that was like a really important part of like getting this inventive culture going, is that everyone feels like what they're sensitive to, what they're reacting to is part of the group's problem, the group's existence, and that everyone else is then supporting that. And I think that helped make really good creative teams.
If you could go back 10 years, let's say, what would you the thing with things you know now, in that intervening time, what would you tell yourself of 10 years ago that you didn't know back then?
Well, I've had to confront this a little bit with like, I have a 16-year-old son, who I'm remembering, which is more than 10 years ago. I'm not 26,
That's okay. 15 is fine.
um, but I think, when you're younger and you're kind of coming into the world, you have this perception of like, where do I fit? You know? And so I struggled because like being a designer and engineer, I was like sometimes the geek with the designers and sometimes I was like the artsy guy with the engineers. And I always struggled to sort of put myself in which box. And like as a career, like how do I be more engineer like or how to be more designer like, and kept trying to do that. And I don't know why I was trying to put myself in those boxes. It's like what I've learned now is to be comfortable with who you are. And it's like, if you're really stuck in one box, you're just trying to be the best designer that you read about in a magazine, or you're trying to be that engineer that, whatever gets rewarded in these ways. It's like you are really doing yourself a disservice. That it's more important to really be authentic and be who you are. And, easier said than done, because a lot of times you don't really yet know who you are. But I think the quicker you can become comfortable with who you are, the more successful you will be. And a lot of times, even when I'm hiring people now, I don't hire a designer with the best portfolio, and I don't hire an engineer that had like the best grades or whatever best project. For now, I start looking like, well, who's going to fit within this inventive culture? Who's going to like be the member of the team that's going to empower everyone else, and it's going to be more different than everybody else and more unique rather
Yeah, right,
than
and I think in a
more the
way,
same.
our education system has been training us to become more and more and more specialized, and while there's value in having a depth of knowledge in a particular sphere, and that's great, there's also value in being more of a generalist, right? And being, not saying you have to be a polymath, but you to have this ability that you were just talking about to bounce more one side or the other between design and engineering. It's fine. You're more of a designer in some projects, depending on what it is, and you're more of an engineer on others. But at the end of the day, you're seeking a solution, right? You're actually putting things into action, and that's what I value most in people
Mm.
is those who go beyond talking. And I do a lot of the talking, but I also do some of the action with companies, right? And it's that moving from talk to action that is the most important.
No, I think that's 100% true. And I think, one of the things, is how much can you really be a pollinator? Um, Early on in my design career, I was designing a lot of bicycle equipment, and I was working with the Trek Pro team, the U.S. national team, the cyclists, fantastic guys, just monsters of men, really. And for a top end glove, they didn't want more padding; they wanted less. And then ultimately, it was like, well, how do you get to the least amount of padding that gives them the grip and all that stuff? And it's only because I was designing footwear that I realized there's this material that was perfect for that because it's already been there. It'd been in footwear for more than 20 years, but it shows up in gloves and people are like, wow, this is revolutionary. And, you know, and it truly wasn't. It was just by the fact that I was designing in both of those categories that the information can travel.
But
And
that's
that was a
exactly
really,
where innovation comes from, isn't it, Ali? Right? It's taking something that might seem commonplace in one area, but you're applying it in an area where it is completely unique and new, and so it's both old and new at the same time.
yeah, no, 100% right. And then, like, the trick is how do you keep maintaining those things like top of mind that you can keep pollinating across those categories. Um,
How do you deal with the progress, not perfection part of the sustainability conundrum?
yeah, I mean, Wayne Taylor Sr. is one of my all-time favorite professors. He has passed recently, I'm sorry to say, but I remember someone asking him about when he finished this painting, and his classic Southern drawl. He goes, "Oh hell, I'll never finish the painting. I just stop." and And I feel like you have to do that, right? You might not ever be finished, but you just got to stop at some point and move on to
Well,
the
and the
next thing.
commercial imperative probably helps you to find the stopping point, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people telling you to stop all the time, right? I mean, like the
In the
a
nicest possible
manufacturer,
way.
yeah, a manufacturer wants you to stop before you started several times because they got their deadlines and they got their stuff. So you got to carve out your space. But also, I think one of the things that I see, for instance, in product development is that, listen, we have iterations. Like in software now, we're very used to the concept of 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. And so I think in product cycles, we have to think that same way. Or in sustainable innovation cycles, like, okay, we'll get to 5% recycled content year one, just so everyone gets used to it, then 10, then 15, then 30, or, whatever it's going to be. And sometimes we just have to say, we'll make some incremental at the beginning, as long as we all have a commitment to get there a bit further, and
Yeah, I've
sort of
said
just
for years, as we didn't get to where we are in one design iteration, and we won't get out of it in one design iteration either.
that's the truth. Yeah.
So, Ali, we've had a good chance to chat here. Well, I want to bring this to a close with asking you if is there one thing you would like listeners and viewers to walk away knowing about you and your business that we perhaps haven't covered so far?
Well, thank you. I mean, I've enjoyed the discussion as always, Ken. For me, it's hard to turn it directly back on me. I think there's just a lot of challenges in front of us, and the one that I'm feeling the most pressing is that we have to train the designers and engineers of tomorrow, or even of today on how to do better than we did. Right. And like the training, we didn't talk about sustainability very much in school. You know, the idea of styrofoam being a problem when I was in university was kind of like a new concept for some reason. And designers already know that now, but do they have the skills? Do they have the ways of addressing that? And I think one of the most powerful, simple things that we need to be focusing on is like, let's just break it down to just carbon, right? Let's just talk about, climate and carbon into the atmosphere. We, as designers, engineers, I always have a financial budget. I'm always given a financial budget, but I'm very rarely, let's say 0 times, given a carbon budget. So we know by science-based targets and all that stuff that footwear, has to come down 83% over the next certain amount of years in carbon. We know we have targets for every category. So what if the listeners here agreed at least one time this year to assign a carbon budget to a project? And if someone needs help developing their carbon budget, I'm happy to do that. If they need help realizing that budget, I'm also happy to do it. But regardless, we all need to start thinking about that. Let's just look at carbon budgeting for the next year. Like as a team, your listening base, everyone that's in your sphere and my sphere, and just say, what if we started designing a little bit different, or as if we had a budget? Imagine that. And then imagine if our budget started getting better. So this is the one thing I'd really like to see people do. And again, anyone can develop this. There's a lot of different methodologies. I have some favorite ones I'd like to do, but the most important thing is that we all get alignment that we need to start budgeting our impacts.
Well, I think your idea of starting with even just the idea of a budget, right, it's the same as how you start designing any project, right? You start with a blank page. You've got nothing on the page. You've got nothing in your budget. Okay, so start saying, I'm going to design a whatever, or I'm going to design with carbon in mind. It's back to the beginning of where we started our conversation, right? It's putting it on the list of things that you're going to pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Aly, I've appreciated the time to talk with you today. I really support everything you're doing. And for folks who are watching and listening, we will put links to Aly's work in the show notes. And we'll also be talking to Aly again back probably in December. And Aly's working on some new thoughts that he's putting out on paper, and we will share those with you in a couple of months' time. So for now, Aly, thank you very much, and we appreciate your time.
And super pleasure. I really appreciate it.
I'm your host, Ken Alston.